Before I entered rabbinical school, I spent a few years working as a youth director at a synagogue in Boston. As my time there was coming to an end, a congregant stopped me and asked, "Hey, Jeremy, when was your bar mitzvah?" 1996, I told him. Now, I am aware I'm in this weird period of life where that date, 1996, sounds impossibly ancient to the students I teach, while also alarmingly recent to others in this community. But alas, that's when my bar mitzvah was. But it turns out that was not actually what he meant by his question. No, he said, not what year was your bar mitzvah, but what time of the year was it? I said it was in September. And he said, Genesis. And I responded, no, actually it was Deuteronomy. I was one of the last bar mitzvahs, or I was the last bar mitzvah before Rosh Hashanah in my synagogue. He seemed disappointed with that answer. Jeremy, he said, you have just disproven my theory. What an honor, I said. Now, what was your theory? And he explained, I was convinced that rabbis all had their bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs in the fall after the high holy days. Why would you think that? I asked. Because, he said, the best parts of the Torah, those are all at the beginning. My theory was that students who had those portions would be captivated and drawn into Judaism. Now, this is not actually a bad theory. If you take a moment and think of your favorite passage from the Torah, or the one that comes to mind most readily, chances are it's one that's about the matriarchs or the patriarchs, or it's about Noah and his ark, or the Tower of Babel, or Sodom and Gomorrah and Abraham again, or Joseph and his coat. Odds are, whatever you are thinking of, it was from Genesis. You might be thinking about the 10 plagues or the splitting of the sea, but that might be because of the holiday that begins tomorrow. But in any case, if there is a most captivating part of the Torah, then there must, by definition, also be a least captivating part. And my friends, we have just begun. It is, of course, a cliche to describe our current book, Leviticus, as technical or repetitive or even gross when it comes to all its talk of animal sacrifices. Rabbi Bradley Artson suggests that the most common complaint about these passages that are filled with ritualistic, detailed instruction on preparing and rendering sacrifices is perhaps the most stinging. Not that it's boring, not that it's gross, but rather that it's irrelevant. Rabbi Artson then reminds us we are not the first generation to think of this critique. The sacrifices took place at the temple, the same one that was destroyed in the year 70. That means for close to 2,000 years now, these instructions that we read about have had no practical purpose. Do we really think that we are the first generation to notice that? A midrash from the centuries after the temple fell asks the question, in the past, we used to offer sacrifices and we studied them, but now that there aren't any sacrifices, do we really need to study about it? The Midrash answers its own question. God teaches that studying these sacrifices, it is akin to actually doing them. Rabbi Artson adds, we can learn of our ancestors' sense of loyalty, obedience to divine fiat, and their intimacy with God by studying their piety and their practice. We train ourselves to share our ancestors' piety and passion. By reading about the sacrifices, we learn to shift the center of our spiritual gravity away from self-gratification toward meeting the needs of others and to the divine other, to God. In other words, just because we literally cannot perform these sacrifices doesn't make them irrelevant. And just because we lack not only the ability to offer animal sacrifices without a temple, but for I imagine the vast majority of us, we also lack the desire to do so, still, that does not make their study less relevant. What it means, though, is that we must delve beyond the surface of what we see. In this week's portion, we read about the burnt offering, which is to be left on the altar, burning all night, every night. Come morning, every morning. What was an offering the night before is now ash covering the altar. As the Torah instructs, the priest shall dress in linen raiment and linen clothing with linen breeches next to his body, and he shall take up the ashes to which the fire has reduced the burnt offering on the altar and place them beside the altar. The priest shall then take off his vestments and put on other vestments and carry the ashes outside the camp to a clean place. Why the costume change? The commentator Rashi offers an answer. It's sensible. If you've ever cleaned out a fireplace or a fire pit, you know it is a dirty job. It makes sense that you would change from the fine priestly garments that they wore when officiating at these rituals to something that was a little more, everyday. But this leads to a deeper question. Why is it the priest who is doing this work? The priest, the leader of Israelite society, every morning takes off his fancy clothes, the ones that only he is allowed to wear, and he walks away from the grandeur of the altar and walks through the camp covered in ash. And he doesn't just do this once or twice a year as some kind of show, or some PR stunt, you might call it, but he does it every single day. Surely there is someone else who could be doing this work. Why would it be this way? The requirement changes the relationship between priest and Israel, and it does so in two ways. First, for the congregation, who were used to seeing their leader wearing clothes that no one else could wear, standing in places no one else could stand, performing rituals no one else could perform, it's only natural for them to think this person is above them, both literally standing on the altar, but also figuratively. They might think that, except that from the beginning, there was this other ritual in place every day where their leader came down from the altar in different clothes and walked among them, dragging a bucket of ashes to the edge of the camp. Back in rabbinical school, I was standing in the TSA line at Los Angeles Airport, LAX, at 6:30 in the morning one Friday on my way to my student pulpit in upstate California. Bleary-eyed, I looked up and I saw a minor commotion in front of me as someone was escorted to enter the line directly in front of me. It was a politician who, at this time, happened to be running for president. He didn't succeed. But there he was, standing 3 feet in front of me. Despite all the times I had seen this man on TV, I had never seen him like this. There he was, quickly dumping his wallet and his phone in the plastic bin, having a TSA agent bark at him to take off his belt, standing in that little tube in nothing but his socks. It changed the way that I saw this person. Not enough for me to want to vote for him, but enough that every time I have seen him on TV since, I've thought of him differently. Seeing someone devoid of the trappings of fame and fortune, it humanizes them. It doesn't mean that you won't like the person or respect the person, but it's certainly harder to idolize the person once you have seen them trying to find their Uber driver outside of baggage claim. You run into a lot of celebrities when you're in LAX. Priests played a role, but in Israelite society, they were not God, and they were not to be worshipped. So if one danger is people looking up toward the priest, the complementary concern is the priest looking down at the people. Bachya ibn Pakuda suggests that the ritual, it's really for the priest's benefit. He writes, Let him belittle his works in his own eyes, castigate his soul for its spiritual deficiency before God and humanity, discard fame and honor. He goes on to say the purpose of the ritual is for the priest to humble himself and remove the haughtiness from his heart. Then, as now, society has a hierarchy. And the difference is today, of course, religious leaders are not quite at the top, and maybe that's a good thing. But anyway, what's striking, to me at least, is that the Torah gave not just guidance, but commandments meant to mitigate the downsides of a society where some were leaders and some were followers. The Torah recognized that any such arrangement, if left unchecked, was bound to lead some to believe that they were above others, that they were elites. And the Torah recognized that this way of thinking, this was not good. This was not good for anyone. And that is why the priest starts his day, every day, covered in soot and ash, taking out the trash. Genesis gives us the beautiful teaching that we are all B'Tselem Elohim, created in the image of God. It is a powerful idea, and one that you have no doubt heard from this pulpit many times. It is the sort of thing that maybe a young child might read studying for a bar or a bat mitzvah and find inspiring. But it is here, in Leviticus, where we learn how to put such a lofty idea into actual practice. It's here that we learn that for us to all realize we are not just holy, but equally holy. And that sometimes there must be times when we are reminded of our shared humanity. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will. Shabbat Shalom.